Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Women Like Me Stories in Business. I'm your host, Julie Fairhurst, and today I'm here with Cinda Gault. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, you did.
Yay! Perfect. Okay. So she is an author, a speaker whose work celebrates the adventurous woman. So I'm interested in getting into that. Is the kind of woman who do not simply accept what life has handed them, but they choose to question, they take risks, and sometimes rebel their way into becoming who they really want to be. So, today we're going to talk about brave women on the page, the voices history left too quiet, and the power of telling women's stories, and how fiction can reveal a deeper truth than dates and records ever could. So, Cinda, thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so I like to begin with finding out a little bit more about you and how you became a writer.
Okay, well, it was a circuitous route. I did not start out wanting to be a writer. I have always followed my interests, and that led me in the 70s to be at university, undergrad in psychology. And I was one of those young feminists running around setting up rape crisis centers and shelters for victims of domestic violence. So a group of women and I started a university club called Women in Crisis, and that's how we started
Oh,
sort of getting into the issues and understanding them. And I became the first executive director, and it was my job to set up a shelter, get funding for it, get community support for it, which I did. And when I finished that, I thought I had spent a lot of time working with victims. I'd like to go check out some perpetrators. So I became a prison guard at a local correctional center for men in the maximum security wing that had sex offenders and arsonists and people just with mental problems.
wow.
And I did that for just over a year and then went down to U of T and did an MA in criminology. And domestic violence was my thesis. And I graduated from that, went out, got the job of my dreams as director of a social service agency, and I hated it.
Oh,
And what I realized was that I do not like managing people. I do not like it when it's my job to make sure other people are doing their jobs. That strikes me as what a mummy does, and they were just frankly not cute enough to deserve a mummy. So I had to sit down and think, okay, any job is going to be, it's going to come with its challenges that way. And what would be important enough for me to be willing to go through anything because it felt that meaningful to me. And I had always loved reading and writing. And so I decided then that I would become a writer. But of course, I needed to figure out how to make a living at the same time. So I decided I would write a romance. And I had never read one before, but that's what people were making, a living doing. So I started consuming them by the dozens. And that became my first novel called Past Convictions. And interestingly, last year, I got my rights back a couple of years ago from Harlequin. I mean, it went all around the world, different languages. It was a
wow.
lot of fun. And my current publisher said that she would like to republish it. So I had the experience of, after 37 years, going back and revising my old work. So when I did that original manuscript, there were no computers. I did it on a manual typewriter. So I had, and there were landlines, and there were telephone booths, and there were tape
Yes.
recorders, and all the stuff that before the computer revolution.
Yeah.
So I needed to update. No one was texting anyone. You weren't
Yeah.
carrying around a telephone. So I needed to revise the technology in it. But one thing that was kind of nice to see was the love story didn't change. So apparently we fall in love like we always did, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
And so that was my first publication. I decided that I'd become a writer, and that was the first thing that I did about that. Then the second decision I made was I needed to go back to school in English. I had gone through in social sciences, but English is very different. You don't have your thesis statement up front in your essay. If you said that, people would know who done it at the beginning of the story, and you wouldn't have a story. So I
Right.
wanted to know my tradition, and I wanted to to go back and learn the classics and that sort of thing, which sent me into going back to school, doing an MA in English instead of criminology, and I caught fire academically, went all the way through and did a PhD in English at York University. And my thesis was analyzing Canadian women writers during the identity years of 1965 to 1980, meaning that the social movements that were on everybody's mind then were second wave feminism and Canadian nationalism, aka Pierre Trudeau rather than Justin Trudeau. So the whole
Yes.
kind of feel good about being Canadian time. So I analyzed three women writers who were publishing during that time: Margaret Atwood, Margaret Lawrence, and Marian Engel. So that's what I did academically. And then the third main decision I made at the time was to have my babies. So I had two sons,
Ah,
and we all basically went to school together as I was bringing them up. And then they mercifully went off to university, and I graduated. And so I started teaching, and I had more time to get back to some writing. And that's when I started doing my historical fiction. Um, so
wow.
that's how I came to it. My two boys each had a granddaughter, and for me, their own
Yes.
daughters in 2023. So I have two little 3-year-old granddaughters who I'm very involved with. And
Oh,
so when we talk about women's lives, there's another generation that is directly relevant to me as we go forward. So
yeah.
that's when I started writing and got into the creating characters and researching characters that were women I admired for insisting on having the lives they found meaningful.
Wow. And I mean, you've had an interesting life. So, and I'm assuming you were able to draw from all of that,
For
your
sure, for sure.
careers and yeah, they're
Yes, it gives
interesting.
me a base of information, but plus with my academic work, I'm a Canadianist, so Canadian history became something that was very relevant to my fiction as well.
Wow, that's great. Okay, so you write stories about adventurous women.
Mhm.
What draws you to women who are brave, determined, and willing to go against expectations?
They're interesting. I find that women have interesting lives anyway because
Yes.
of reproduction. I mean, that's the fly in the ointment for women. They have a whole extra layer of life to figure out, and they don't necessarily have to have babies to do it. Women
Yeah.
make decisions over whether they're going to reproduce. If they do and they don't, that all has complicating repercussions to it. So I don't write stories out of any kind of ideology. I find interesting stories, or they occur to me, about women who have interesting lives and who are interesting people. And so that's where I start from. I don't have any even historical fiction. I've written 3 historical fiction books because two of them I discovered through research. That's the first one, This Godforsaken Place, and the second one, A Small Compass, and they are
Ah,
both 19th century stories. So obviously I learned about that world through research. And then the third one, Everything I Hope For, was in the 70s, and I lived through the 70s. So I was able to create a world in a different way. It was out of my own sensibility and experience of it rather than learning about it historically. And so I just those are the 3 historical ones that I've written. The next story is going to be more contemporary. I've got a children's book coming out this year,
oh,
I've done the romance. So I have no particular type of book that I feel constrained to write. It's
yeah.
just as far as I'm concerned, it's the storytelling that drives me.
Yes. Wow. So with your PhD background, studying women writers, what did that teach you about women's voices and how they have been remembered or forgotten?
Well, any writer's greatest fear is obscurity. So,
Mm,
and there is a generational um, interest and that in certain authors, and then that passes, and then a very few of them end up being remembered for different things. So, in the 80s, I used to read D.H. Lawrence, every D.H. Lawrence book I could get my hands on. Well, he's not so trendy today. So it's not
right.
just something that happens to women, but women have certainly become the readers and writers of our day, in the sense that, and I really learned this in writing romance, women are the consumers of storytelling, and the romance genre, it's huge compared to
Yes.
everything else, and that is
Yeah.
all driven by women.
Yes.
And that it came part and parcel historically as writing became more popular, in the popular rather than the elitist sense. And you had people who could actually buy it. Women started having money to be able to buy it. But there were many years,
Mm.
even with popular literature, that you could go to a drugstore and you could rent a romance, for example, and take it back. So it was very cheap to be able to do that. And it's women who have really driven the whole bulk of the reading audience.
Yeah. Yeah. So your novels feature women who are trying to live meaningful lives despite consequences. So why is that theme important to you?
Well, I think that it is, the assumption about women's lives, and it comes from somewhere, is that they are constrained by social expectation.
Mhm.
And we are lucky to be able to be living in Western civilization, where women, especially like in the last 50 years, have had constraints taken off of them. So, back then a woman couldn't get a mortgage, couldn't open up, a bank account, couldn't, if you got married and you were a teacher, you couldn't teach anymore. So there were many constraints at that, before, let's say,
Mhm.
the 1950s. But after the 1950s, so much changed legally and policy wise that today there is very little societal structural constraint on women. So
Mhm.
I think a lot of the constraint that they might feel is actually social, rather than anything that is
Yeah.
is actually going to be a barrier to them. So that becomes the challenge. And you can be self-limiting as far as what you think other people's expectations are. And in a time like back in the 70s, for example, you'd had everybody else telling you what you were supposed to do, and especially young women, because people were worried about their sexual reproductive capacity. So you had people
Yeah.
you knew telling you what to do all the time.
Yeah.
Now, because of technology, you have people you don't know telling you what to do all the time. So
Yes. Yeah.
the thing in there that is so important to recognize is that you are a volitional creature, and women are volitional individuals now with more autonomy than they've ever had. So if
Yeah.
if you are limited, it's because in some way you have bought into that. And it
Yes.
is unnecessary. And when I learned about, for example, Isobel Gunn, she's one of the characters in A Small Compass. That was in 1806. And she was in Orkney, Scotland, 26-year-old young woman. At that time, all the men were away. They were either gang pressed into fighting Napoleon's War, or they were working for the Hudson's Bay Company, because it was in Stromness that the Hudson's Bay hired their employees out of. So
Mm.
she cuts her hair, disguises herself as a man, gets on the ship, and comes over here and works as a man for 18 months before she's outed as a woman 1,800 miles inland at a fur trading post in Pembina. And she was able to do all that because not only did she decide to do it, but she got help from a man. I believe she must have gotten help from a man. I read another novel that was written about her that assumed that she got on that ship all by herself and nobody knew her. I find that very hard to believe,
Mm.
because Stromness is only 2,500 people now. And I don't know if you're from a small town or you know somebody from a small town, but
Yeah.
they get up in your business pretty fast.
Yes.
And they want to know who you are and who you're connected to. And everybody knows someone who
Yes.
knows someone who knows someone connected, whatever. So I do believe that she had help getting on that ship and came over here. And that was very much against what social expectations were at the time.
Mhm.
And she was still willing to take whatever consequences she needed to take for that.
Yeah. Wow. When you were talking, I thought back to um, I was in sales. I was a realtor in my past life for 34
Okay.
years, and I've retired from that now. And I remember pulling title searches from houses where people had lived for 40, 50 years of their life. And it would say, John Smith masonry or whatever he did.
Yeah.
Uh, Rose Smith, his wife.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
And she would be called Mrs. John Smith.
that's
You
right.
know,
That's right. Yes.
so yes,
Yeah.
the changes that we have seen in our lifetime
Yes.
are just dramatic.
Yes.
So you can't be complaining about the same things now as
No.
50, 60 years ago, because
Yeah.
life for women is dramatically different, and there are new problems now
Yes.
that have come up. And because, I mean, studies show that women are less happy now than they were then. Why? You have generations of children that are having anxiety problems and depression problems. Why? You have women who are having a very difficult time managing both a family and a career. There are still only 24 hours in a day, no matter
Mhm.
what your aspirations are. And if you aren't there taking care of kids, somebody else is taking care of them. So those are all challenges I see my daughter-in-law's struggling with,
Yeah.
because it is very much a challenge to do that. Women want an intellectual life as well as a family life, as well as a romantic life. That's a hard bunch of stuff to fit into one life.
Yes. Absolutely. How much of becoming ourselves comes from deciding who we will and will not listen to?
Well, that is understanding who you are, and
Mm.
that's your job. You know, if you know what you want, that comes from knowing who you are, and someone's telling you you can't be that, then the problem is mechanical.
Mm.
How am I going to support myself? Or how am I going to go and do what I want to do if someone is able to put some kind of obstacle in my way? But if you know who you are and you know what you want, there's really no excuse to not do that and be that. And so I think part of what we're reckoning with now as women is the responsibility of freedom. If you can do whatever you want and you are now responsible to do whatever you want, who are you going to blame if you're not happy? You know,
Mhm.
there are all kinds of, you can have hardship in romance. Well, if you have the freedom to pick who you want, it can always be bad luck, bad choice, bad decision making. But it's yours. And
Mhm.
and I think there are consequences to making decisions, having enough power to make decisions. And part of kind of being a fully fledged human being is to take responsibility for your own freedom. And yeah, we always thought in the women's movement, the whole point of the women's movement was to make it so that it wasn't necessary. We're all
Right.
human beings. And as long as we can all be autonomous human beings, you don't need a women's movement.
Hmm.
So, things have changed dramatically as far as the women's movement in many ways, some good, some bad.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone would deny that women have far more freedom and autonomy and personal power now than they did 50 years ago.
Yeah. Can you tell us how you decide on which woman you're going to focus on in history?
Well, it is not a decision-making process so much as a discovery.
Oh.
When I, for example, in I was reading a 19th century journal for a fur trader, and I was actually reading it for research for my first book, which is called This Godforsaken Place, which was later in the century. It was 1885. So this was much earlier, 1806. And the fur trader, his name was Alexander Henry, and by all accounts, he was quite a character. But it was his job as the head of the fur trading company for the Northwest Fur Trading Company in Pembina to keep a journal of everything that happened at the fur trading post every day. So what the you know, what the hunting was, what the trading was, what, you know, what the chores were around the place. They had to make their own furniture. They had to grow their own food. I mean, they were
Right.
really on their own. And so one day there was an asterisk up at the top of the page, and down at the bottom in a footnote, it said an extraordinary thing happened today. After dinner, one they had invited some Hudson's Bay Company employees over for Christmas dinner. It was because it was just after Christmas, and he said one of the Orkney lads, which were the young men who were hired by Hudson's Bay Company as their employees, asked if he could stay behind and warm himself on the hearth. So I said that was fine, but I was going off to bed. And then a short time later, there were lamentations from this room, and one of my men came up and said, "You need to come down here." And I walked into the room, and instead of it being an Orkney lad, it was a young woman giving birth on the hearth. Well, my head exploded when I read that because I thought, oh my God, here's a story that's just dying to be told.
Yes.
So I researched who it was, and it was Isobel Gunn. And to my dismay, I learned that another writer had already written a novel called Isobel Gunn. So I went and
Ah,
read it, and I was shocked at how differently that writer saw this story compared to how I saw the story. And so I thought, all right, I'll just write it the way I imagine it. And I was well along the research path for that when I discovered there was another woman, Marie-Anne Gaboury, who was from Masquinongé, Quebec. And her husband, Jean-Baptiste Lagimondière, worked for the Northwest Company. So they were rivals to the Hudson's Bay Company. And he had been out there for 7 years and had his pay, and he wanted to come back and buy a farm. So he came back to Masquinongé, where Marie Anne had remained unmarried. She was 26. That was very old to not be married, but she swore she was not going to be a farmer's wife. Her father had been a farmer, and he died in a farming accident, and her mother
oh,
remarried a merchant in the village. Much nicer life. So she just decided, I'm not going back to the farm. And so apparently she was drop dead gorgeous, and everybody had proposed to her, and she would rather be a spinster than have to live that kind of life. Well, in comes Jean Baptiste from the West, long hair, sexy leather jacket with fringes, telling about adventure, and swept her off her feet. They got married quickly, and then he learned that he couldn't buy a farm because Napoleon's War made it so that the wood on people's farms was more lucrative. So they weren't selling farms. And so he had to go out west again. And she said, if you don't take me with you, she's probably pregnant by this time. You don't take me with you, you don't ever see me again. So she became the first passenger to go to be paddled by the voyageurs out west. And when I discovered that she and Isobel were in the same place, Pembina, just across the tiny Pembina River from each other, um, like spitting distance, seriously. Uh, and they had their babies within a week of each other. And there's no historical record of them ever having met. So
wow.
there's my story. I mean, I'm discovering my story as I go. So I imagine them meeting, and and have a whole, you know, as they say, hijinks ensue once they do meet in Pembina. So that story is not me deciding who I'm going to write about. You know, I fumble around and stumble over them
Yeah.
and discover them, and then the challenge is to make something out of that.
Wow, that is so interesting.
Mhm.
It must have taken so much courage back in, was the 1800s?
1806, yeah.
Oh, 1806.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it must have, and those they must have been very determined women, and they
Yes.
didn't care what the consequences were. They were going to have their lives according to their own star,
Yeah.
and they were willing to take whatever consequences. And so look what they were able to do. I mean, Marie Anne was the first passenger in those canoes. Well, if one had just said, "Oh, well, you can't do that," and she had, you know, very dutifully gone home and said, well, I'd better not try then that whole story would not have happened.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So interesting. So, do you think fiction gives writers a way to restore women to history when the official records leave them out?
Well, on its deepest level, as far as I'm concerned, fiction, I mean, fiction is storytelling.
Mhm.
And it's the one thing every single culture on this planet does. It's the one thing basically that unifies every country because we all tell stories about ourselves. And I believe that the role of fiction and storytelling in our society is to make being human seem important and worthwhile. That you haul your sorry butt out of bed every morning and you know you're going to die. And somehow you need to be making this a meaningful thing over the course of your life, however long or short it's going to be. And storytelling makes people seem worthwhile. So whether that's women or men or them
Mhm.
interacting or whatever, I think ultimately it amounts to the same thing. Historically, women have not been writers, except for the last, 100 years or so. So the kinds of stories that were told, it's not as if women weren't in stories. But it was stories told by men.
Yes.
There were women writers back then, but they were not the norm. And so now you just have more women's stories coming into the culture and enriching it as far as I can see.
Yeah. Wow. So you, I think it's your third historical novel, The
Yeah.
God-Forsaken Place. Um,
That was the first one.
oh, that was the first one. Okay.
Yeah.
So Abigail hears her mother say that she regrets not being adventurous enough.
Yes.
So why is that such a powerful starting point?
Well, that was Abigail hearing that. Now, Abigail is a fictional character. I had
Okay.
historical characters in that story, one of whom was Annie Oakley, who I have always found
Aha.
very intriguing because she was with a rifle like Wayne Gretzky was with a hockey stick.
Yeah.
She was just so much better than everybody else around her. And here she was a woman beating men at their own game. I imagine she was born with some kind of perceptual gift that she could just do this.
Yeah.
And I think probably Wayne Gretzky has the same thing. So she was one of two historical characters that people that book. But Abigail was a an invention of mine, and she and her father came over here as teachers after Abigail's mother died because Abigail's mother said, I lived my life in too small a compass. I didn't have the whatever it was, the bravery or the insistence or the determination or whatever to go beyond that. And so Abigail decides that she's going to take that as a lesson from her mother and she's going to do something more adventurous. And so after her mother dies, she and her father decide to go to Northwestern Ontario to teach in 1885. And I chose that time because in the background on the prairies was the Louis Riel Rebellion. And I had them go up to a place in Northwestern Ontario called Wabigoon because that's where my husband's from. And it was the middle of nowhere back then. It's the middle of nowhere now still. And I knew the landscape, so I could have her go out. And this story actually started in pieces after I had spent 20 years bringing up my kids and uh, a long time, 9 years doing my PhD. I felt like I had these two huge projects over my shoulders. So I just wanted to feel free. I
Yeah.
wanted to imagine myself on a horse with the wind in my hair galloping over the prairies. And so I just thought for fun, I'm going to research the Jesse James gang because they got to ride horses and do whatever they wanted. If they wanted to rob a bank, they went and rob a. So I started researching them. And I was very surprised by how close Canadian and American um, history was at that time. That you had the Jesse James gang in Minnesota, just over the border from where Louis Riel was having his rebellion. And the other historical figure that I was interested in was Gabriel Dumont, who was Louis Riel's right-hand general. And I found him interesting because you think of a military man being very insistent and rigid on what he wanted to do. Uh, and he was apparently a wonderful tactician to, scope out what his plan would be for a military exercise. And Louis Riel kept saying to him, God doesn't want you to do that. Well, you would think that that would be a point of conflict between the two of them, but it wasn't. Dumas just stood down and let Louis Riel tell him what to do. And if Dumas had been able to do the kind of stuff he wanted to do, that could have turned out very differently. So when it failed, he rode south and was a sort of a refugee in the U.S. And then I found out that both he and Annie Oakley wound up at the Wild Bill Cody show in New York at the same time. So again, that was a discovery, my head blowing up
Yes.
discovery. And so that gave me a structure for the epic journey I was going to send Abigail on. So she's up in Wabigoon at this time. Her father falls ill with consumption. And she's thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get stranded out here all by myself. And the shop owner is paying way too much attention to her. So she feels trapped. And so she buys a rifle just so that she can shoot something out back, just feel like she can act as her father is fading. And one day she stumbles over a wounded Jesse James gang member. And as she's bending over trying to figure out who he is, she gets shot from behind, shot at from behind. She wheels around with her rifle and she shoots dead the Pinkerton cop who was tracking him. So now she has a big problem on her hands. And that is what's going to launch her into her major journey. I'm going to take her out to Winnipeg, down through Manitoba, into the States in New York. And she is going to meet up with Annie Oakley and Gabrielle Dumont, and hijinks ensue. So I discovered what her journey would be
Yeah.
when I discovered these two historical characters that I was so interested in actually were in this place at this time. And then that's just a synchronicity that you work with to create the story.
Wow. So interesting the way you come up with your stories and you find your characters. So I have Women Like Me, Stories of Business is I have a program for women and
Mhm.
they write their true life stories. So what kind of advice would you give them that they've never written in their lives? They're just getting started. And some of the ladies have actually gone on to write children's stories, and a couple others have written novels. But what advice would you give to a woman that wants to write, but has never done it and is fearful?
Well, I would say be clear about what you want to do, because there's a whole raft of things that you could do depending on what you're looking for. If you're looking for kind of a self-expression, wanting to get something down on paper so you can stand back and look at your life, look at your choices, look at whatever, that's kind of journaling. And you don't ever have to show that to anybody. That is something that's almost your own therapy that you're doing for yourself. And that is worthwhile just in its own way. There's a big difference between wanting to be a writer and wanting to write a book.
Ah,
Because if you want to be a writer, that's going to take a very long time. And it is,
mm,
I mean, it's the joke is people say, well, when I retire, I'm going to be a writer. And at a cocktail party, and somebody says, yeah, when I retire, I'm going to be a surgeon. The thing
right.
is, it takes
Yeah.
there's skill involved, there's knowledge involved, and it takes a very long time to create the skills to be able to do that. And not everybody wants to be a writer, but rather has a story maybe of their own life or something that they've been thinking of, and they
Yes.
just want to get that story done. So if that is what they want, I mean, if you want to
Yeah.
be a writer, fair enough, but you're in for a long haul, and it better be important to you.
Yes.
But if you just want to write a book because you have a story you want to get out, then I would suggest people hire an editor or a ghostwriter or somebody to help them. They provide the content and they hire somebody to help them with the structure and with the sort
Yeah.
of the nuts and bolts skills that a writer needs, and then they can focus on the woman can focus on what is important to her, which is the content, which is telling what happened in their lives, and she can tell it to somebody who can actually translate that into a story structure. In my book, Everything I Hope For, I've been writing that story for 40 years because I'll never write a more autobiographically inspired story than that. And that has been the problem because you can't just write life. and expect that to be a story, because life is and then and then and then. It's got all kinds of stuff thrown into the bucket that is not germane to the story. So
Yes.
when you're writing a story, it's about the choices that you're making, the details you're going to put in. What you leave out is just as important as what you put in. And it has a structure up to a climax. You know, there's a point to it. There's a lot of uh, skill that goes into it. So I would suggest hiring somebody who has those skills. For my first book, the romance, I had sent off 3 chapters and an outline 3 times to Harlequin, and each time I got a rejection letter back. A form letter, just a different form letter, rejecting it. So I was now had my fourth 3 chapters in an outline. And I just thought, oh my God, I can't bear rejection one more time. So I phoned the local community college that had a romance writing course. And I left my name and asked if the instructor could call me back, because she had been a Harlequin editor at one time.
Ah,
And so she called me back. I told her what I was looking for, and so she read it, and it wasn't nearly as expensive as I thought it would be. She charged by the hour, a reasonable fee, and she read 3 chapters in a very short period of time, and she could come back to me and say, yes, this one's going to be rejected too. And she had a context and a knowledge base that I didn't have. This was back in the 80s. So she said, make him a working class hero, because people are sick of middle class heroes. So don't make him a painter, make him a house painter, because Bruce Springsteen was the cool guy at the time, right? So it
right.
was stuff I couldn't have known. She was able
Ah,
to say, now go back to the
interesting.
beginning and put that together. And that's when my heroine was a youth bureau police officer, and my hero was an owner of a group home. So, I had them reverse roles here, because she was the cop and he was the social worker. And I said it in Guelph because apparently Americans find Canadian destinations exotic. When
Okay. Yes.
Guelph became an exotic place.
Yeah.
And so that was what I was able to work up from that. And so
Yeah.
every time I wrote a few chapters, I would send them off to her. She'd read them and she'd tell me if I was on the right track or not. And that's the one that worked. So I don't know
Wow.
how long I would have spent flailing around and wasting my time. But I got her. I didn't have any money at the time, but it ended up being the best money I could have spent. And it was not very
Yes.
much. So I just think that could save people a lot of uh, grief and hardship about trying
Yes.
to expect something of themselves that they have not been trained for.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. And I think when they, getting started and then, yeah, just going through it. But you're so right, because we don't know what we don't know. Just like
exactly.
you didn't know
Yeah.
until she brought that forward, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. And away you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and so it's difficult to come up with those things that you just don't know.
That's
What do you
right.
think about people and AI these days?
Well, AI is obviously going to be a force. That would be like asking me in the 80s when I was writing my romance, what do you think about this whole computer thing?
Oh,
You know?
oh no, I feel like I'm aging.
As people did back then. I don't know. I don't trust it.
That's
So
right.
the thing is, whether you like it or not, or whether you trust it or
Yes.
not,
Yes.
the whole social media thing and everything has all caused all kinds of trouble, but it's also
Yes.
been an incredible boost to human productivity. I mean, we can do stuff now that we've
Yes.
just never been able to do. So I
Yes.
look at my 3-year-old granddaughters and I'm thinking,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
AI is going to be your world. And
Yes.
I hope at one time they roll their eyes at their millennial parents and say, oh God, Dad, you just don't understand this, because I have had from my millennials, boomer, for a
Yes.
very long time. So
Yes.
now I don't think AI is ever going to be human. I
No.
don't think that it's ever going to take the place of being human, but it's going to be smarter in a lot of ways than human. I find just I can tell to a certain extent when I'm getting emails from people who want me to hire them to market my stuff, and I can tell it's been written by AI.
Mm,
And oftentimes these are people who can't really speak English very well. And
mm.
you can tell the kind of AI that comes out of that. So people will become very sophisticated at being able to identify what's being done by AI. I also notice that I'm on LinkedIn and I get fed constantly jobs for people, for writers, which there never used to be, creative writers, to contribute to AI, to make the AI better culturally, in being
Oh,
able to assess people's what people produce as far as their own stories and that's that sort of thing. And it's worthwhile remembering that these are people who are being hired to do this and lay down, an information base. They don't have jobs and they're being
right,
paid not very much money to do this.
right.
So whenever I've
Mm.
played around with AI, and whenever you say anything about women in AI, what you get back is, oh, they're so oppressed and isolated, and everybody's forgotten them and left them behind. And then I
Yeah.
put in, don't make women look so much like victims, and they say, good call. No, women are the blah, blah. So they go down a different track. So it's
Yes,
it's not as if there isn't a
yes,
great need for critical thinking and independent thinking as there always have been and there always will be. People will become more sophisticated in using it and understanding it and that sort of thing. And it's as beyond my imagination now what that will look like as it was in the 80s,
yeah,
thinking of social media on a phone that can fit in your hand.
yes,
There are,
yes,
I mean, it's fantastic in
yes,
many ways. And of course, like anything else, it brings its dangers with it.
yes, yes, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you hope that women of the future inherit from women of the past?
Well, I am very much an old-fashioned feminist now. I don't think I would be a feminist in this day and age because um, what we wanted in the 70s was leave me alone. I will take my own risks. You don't need to protect me. Make the laws fair and equal to everybody, but don't, because you want to protect me, make me have a curfew at university in residence, and those sorts of things. I will take my risks, thank you very much. That's the whole thing that we fought for. And I find in more recent times that, probably, the Me Too movement was when you really saw a bifurcation between old feminists and new feminists. But there is more of a sense that it's society's job to protect women. And it at times seems almost Victorian to me that if you are going to protect women from anything bad that can happen to them, what do you need, a chaperone? How does
Right.
that happen? Or do you just stay in your house and not take risks? So there's something about that
Mm,
that makes me very uncomfortable. So when I am now teaching my granddaughters things, I want them to be brave, careful but brave. And
yes.
when they're 6 years old, I'm going to put them in Krav Maga so that they can handle themselves physically,
Yes.
and teach them that if something, what it is that wouldn't feel right, and to get it out on the table, because it's the
Hmm.
shock that makes a lot of women more vulnerable. If you don't know what's happened to you and you don't know how, well, there are women cops. They know very well what's going on when this
Yes.
happens, and they're more than capable of responding to it. And I would like
Yes.
my granddaughters to have that kind of sensibility. I'm strong and I'm brave and I'll take my own risks, and I have the skills to do something about it if anybody gives me a hard time. That would be
Yes.
what I would like. I don't want the the narrative to be, you need to protect me more and more.
Hmm.
I just that's not the way I would want to live my life.
Yeah.
Because then you've
Yeah.
got people whose job it is to protect you. And that would drive me nuts,
Yes.
you know?
Well, yes. Yeah. Well, your granddaughters are lucky to have you.
Oh,
Absolutely.
that's very
Because
sweet.
I think that's if we could have learned that.
Yeah,
Yeah, if somebody
yeah.
could have instilled that in us. Well, Cinda, where can listeners find your books, connect with you, learn more about your work?
Well, Google my name and
Okay.
it'll take you to my website and my socials, and you'll be able to find out information about it. My books are on Amazon. My publisher is Grey Goose Press, so you can always, that's
Huh.
in Alberta, right beside
Yeah.
you. And so you can always find them there or on Amazon. But probably my website is where you'll have most of the
Okay.
information all collected together.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we have that in the show notes so that if anybody's interested, that it's easily they can go ahead and they can find that.
That would
Well,
be
I
great.
have just really enjoyed our conversation, and thank you so much for doing that. And it's got it just helps to expand our minds a bit when we talk to others that are doing some pretty interesting things. Can I just ask before we go? I'm curious about how much. This is probably a loaded question, but how much research are you having to do with your books? Which are you just like do you research for a year and or do
Well,
you
there's
it's
there's no there's no there's no formula to it.
yeah,
For the first two, I did a tremendous amount of research. For everything I hope for, I didn't do any research because
ah,
I lived it. So
right,
that the kind of story I was
right,
telling you, it was more how it smelled and it felt, and there were historical things that happened at the time, but I was showing how they have the personal sort of integration of that.
yes,
Mordecai Richler was bringing Canada to its knees over the abortion law at the time. So there's abortion as an issue figures into it. There's,
right,
marriage is a big discussion in the story. So marriage has gone through a lot of changes, but it was
yes,
because I lived through it. I didn't need to do any research about it. And the
right,
the next book I'm going to do is a contemporary one. I thought when I was around 60, I thought that my teaching was going to dry up. So I thought, oh my God, I have to do something else. And so
yeah.
I bought what turned out to be three little rental properties in Hamilton, an hour away from here. And that was now a big learning curve for me they were just little two-bedroom little houses in the ghetto. And I had to learn how to, I mean, I am the handyman of our household.
Ah,
My father taught my brother all of that stuff and not me. Like, not only because I was a girl, but because I wasn't interested in it. I didn't become
right,
interested in the handyman stuff till I had a house, and then you do it or you pay for it.
yes.
So I'm the one with all the power tools now. And so I learned, from HGTV, and my brother ended up teaching me, it went through
Yes,
my dad to me.
yeah,
And so I renovated the houses in Hamilton and became a landlord. I'm still a landlord. And there are a lot of interesting stories that come
yeah.
up from that. And so my
Yes.
challenge, my as a writer, my challenge is going to be, how do I put those sort of stories that aren't related to each other into a larger story structure so that it's
Ah,
integrated. And so that's what the challenge that will expand my chops as a writer will be.
yes,
I have content that I won't have to research because, again, I've lived through a lot of that stuff. But as a
yes.
writer, it will continue to stretch me, and that's going to be a contemporary story.
Ah,
So I
yeah.
have so many story ideas. I will die long before I ever get all of those
Oh,
stories out.
yeah, yeah,
I've never confronted a blank page. I've never not had ideas, and that was as an academic as well as a fiction writer. So it's just the
yeah,
way I seem to be built.
yes, yeah,
Um, so I mean, I know the story after that I want to write.
yeah,
So I'm
yeah.
running out of time, not stories.
That's the problem for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, thank you very much for sharing that and for sharing your the history of your life and what brought you to writing. I think that for a lot of my audience, this is going to be a very important podcast for them to listen to
Oh,
because I think
wonderful.
it'll just really help to understand what like what you said, if you want to be a writer you can be one, but but
Yes, that's right.
but
Don't be a writer or do a PhD or have a kid unless you really want to,
want to.
because it's going to take a lot of time and energy to do that.
Exactly, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Well, Cinda, thank you so much, and thank all of you for being here for another episode of Women Like Me Stories in Business, and we'll see you all again next time. Take care, everybody. Bye.